Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk, lively conversation for all things church transformation. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney Britton, in our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of the U.S. And I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, author and denominational leader, Dr. Kris Tenney Britton, the area minister of the Northeast area of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. Try and say that 3 times fast. Good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk Live.
Bill and Kris Tenney Britton here today to talk to you about interviewing a prospective pastor. Now, if you're a pastor listening in on the show and you're about ready to click off, let us invite you to stay, particularly if you're going to be interviewing down the line, because there's going to be some good information that you'll want to be listening to about how we recommend and how more judicatories are training their congregations to interview pastors. However, if you're a congregation, this is for you. This is for the search committee, the search team, whoever it is that's looking. And we know there's a lot of different denominations and you do it a lot of different ways. But if you're a denomination, if you're a congregation that is going to interview the pastor, whether you have a pastor who is sent to you or a pastor whom you call, then you're going to want to listen up, because we're going to talk about the process of the interviewing and questions to look for and
little red flags.
Little red flags. So, we pretty well got a jam-packed session here, so let's jump right in.
Here we go. Well, we do need to say we are going to talk about interviewing prospective pastors, but there are a few things you want to do before you get to this interviewing stage. And we're going to do interviews in 2 stages. We're going to talk about phone interviews and initial interviews, and then on-site interviews. Now, to be prepared for all of that, you've got to first determine who you need in a pastor, not what you want in a pastor. Generally, we can tell you what you want in a pastor, but this is about who you need. So you want to be clear about your mission, your vision, your values. You want to say, where is it God's calling us to be? What is it that God is calling us to do? And why aren't we doing it yet? Where's the gap? And what do we need in a pastor? Who do we need that can help us move over through that gap?
Now, this is a real key, because if you don't have this foundation built, and a lot of churches say, well, we're going to call our pastor who is going to lead us in this process. And the problem with that whole idea is that, that's your pastor's job, your incoming pastor. If they come in and they determine where you're going to go, the reality is you're going to change every time you get a new pastor. And as a congregation, you need to know where God is calling you and then finding the fit. You're going to say something there.
Yeah, another problem with that is that if you call a pastor to help you discover where God is calling you to be, that pastor may not be the pastor to either get you there or to be there with you. So you've really had an unintentional interim.
Or they'll do where they feel comfortable taking you,
right,
as opposed to where you need to go. So if you have an interim, or you're going to engage in an interim process, you want to make sure you bring in a transformational interim who will walk you through this process, particularly if you don't already have it. Now, if you already know the rest of it, then it's a whole different ball of wax, but you need to know where you're going to go. Now, I want to just touch base on the values thing,
sure,
just real quick, because I had a conversation just today with a congregation, and they're trying to discover their values, and the values they discovered that they wanted are values that the church wants to have, not the ones that the church actually has. And if the church really called a pastor based on those values, I promise you that pastor would not last a single year. It would be all over before the end of the year, because this congregation has these idealized values that would take them away from who they actually are. They all sound good. They're good, solid values, but they're not ready to be there. And if they called a pastor to take them there, like I said, it would be just a not match. So you want to make sure your values are the values you carry, not the values you wish you had.
Right, good. Well, let's say this too, that we're going to be talking about questions in a little bit, and when we talk about the interviews. But one of the pre-pieces that you may want to do is have some questions that you want all potential candidates to answer. Thank you. You're going to have their profiles. You're going to be looking at them, but to start, you may have a lot of profiles or a lot of resumes.
Yeah, right. Resumes,
Lots
profiles,
of
papers.
possibilities.
Every denomination calls them different. So we
Right.
probably call them papers or
profiles,
profiles. But just know that we're
maybe
talking
resumes.
about. Yeah, just know that that's what we're talking about. Is that whatever the pastor's prepared in advance. In terms of paperwork.
So hopefully you'll have lots of candidates to initially look through, and you've got to be weeding through them, and you'll have different ways of doing that. And we can consult with you in some possibilities for
and
doing that.
And your judicatory will probably do that with as well.
Definitely. So now, okay, so now you're going to get to where you have 5-7 people that you're pretty interested in, and maybe there
or you think
are
you're
more
interested
that, yeah.
in.
And if you've got a dozen, you definitely want to send questions out, because that will let you know how serious they are, and they're going to be general questions. You want to see how people answer them, where they're coming in with all of that.
Give us an example. What are a couple of good questions?
Okay, well, one of those questions might be, we've just had values, our values articulated, and one of our values is social justice. Tell us how you live out that value of social justice.
Okay, right,
So
great.
it could
Okay,
be
good
something like
example.
that, right? If it were conflict, it might be a time that they've had to deal with conflict. That could be another question.
Right, and those are the kind of questions you're going to ask later on, and we'll talk more about that on the on-site interview. All right.
So. Okay, so you want to be prepared for this interview. Before the interview, you're going to send out initial information to the candidates, something about the church, maybe something about the community. You're going to want to send them information about who's on that search committee. Tell them, one of the positions I've interviewed for in the past, they sent me their names, how long they'd been members of the church, what their hobbies were, so that I had a sense of who they were. And then you want to give them an interview outline, not the questions, but just we're going to, introduce each other. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. You want to give them that outline, and then there may be information that they've requested before that phone interview, and you want to make sure that you've prepared that and gotten that to them beforehand.
Right, and one of the things you will probably not be talking about, at least in detail, will be finances at this point. You may want, or they may ask a question about the general salary package, and you'll want to be able to answer that, but this is not the place where you start negotiating.
Right.
If they ask that kind of question, they're just trying to make us find out whether they fit in or can make a living, if you will, at your if they're called to your congregation.
Well, yeah, I want to share that I look at this whole search process, and you've come to do as well, as a courting. You might call it dating in the 1950s, at least the way my father told me it was supposed to be, and that was in the 70s, but he still thought that's the way it should be. And
most churches still think 1950 is what we're saying.
It really does
All
work.
right.
It really does work. People who were around to date in 1950 had told me that this does apply. So what you do is, you're looking out at the field of candidates, if you will, or who you might get to date, and then you start to say, I think I'd like to have you phone for conversations. So you may have some phone conversations. You may ask some questions, some initial questions. When you get to that phone conversation, now you're trying to really hone it down, because you want to play the field. More than likely you're going to have another phone interview with candidates. If you've got more than a couple, 3 candidates, you can't really decide who you'd like to have on site. Then you're going to get to these on-site interviews. When you get to one candidate, you're really dating, and then as you're dating, that's when you begin to talk about engagement, and that's the negotiating piece. So you're really not going to talk about engagement and negotiations until you get to an on-site interview, and you're more definite about what you want in a candidate, and then you'll move into an agreement. And in our tradition, at least, we have what we call installation services, and I always say that's like the wedding.
All right, so you got the pre-work you're going to do. Now let's talk about this initial interview, this the beginning of the, if you will, the real process. You've got it pared down to probably 3 to 5 candidates or thereabouts, and you're going to arrange a phone interview. Now, we want to make a first recommendation that if it's possible for you to do a video conference call, a video call like Skype or Uvu or one of these outfits, you want to try and arrange that, because you want to have an eyes on as you talk with a candidate. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, their goal is to never let you see them sweat, and your goal is to try and get them to sweat a little bit. But you also want to see how they come across and so on. And of course, there's a lot can be told in the way people field questions and the way they look, as opposed to necessarily how they sound. You're also going to want to set these in blocks of about an hour. You don't want an interview to go more than an hour.
Right.
And the reality is you want to do sort of the psychiatric hour. It's actually only about 50 minutes. And allow 10 minutes for break time or overage or whatever. But you want to schedule some time, maybe 15 minutes to a half hour between calls. You're going to want to make all this call on one evening, and you're going to want to have some time to, and we'll talk about that, between the candidates to have some conversation and take notes and so on. So that's what you want to do before you actually set up the conference calls. Then you want to set them up. And as best you can, get them all on one night. You may not be able to get them all on one night, but you want to give that a shot. And then you go ahead and get together and you make the calls. All right, run with it.
So you're going to make these calls, and keep in mind that the goal of these initial meetings are you do want to get to meet the candidate. You want to ascertain whether or not they're really interested in this position. They may not be. I remember I did interview for a position, and I was looking for a totally different kind of position than that was, and but my deal with God has been, if the door comes, I'm going to knock and walk through that door. Well, in this case, the judicatory minister had been saying, you really need to interview, you really need to interview. And so we're talking, and at the end of that conversation, somebody said, it sounds like you aren't really interested in this kind of ministry. And I said, well, to be honest, I'm not. I'm just trying to be obedient to an agreement I have with God. And that led to a second interview after that by phone, but in the end we all came to the realization that that wasn't what I was supposed to pursue. So anyways, you want to find how interested are they. You're going to want to use this time to clarify any questions you may have that are on their papers, profile, in their Vita. If you've used that question scenario before this, maybe there's some questions that you've got for them there. Another goal then is also to weed out candidates, because what you're really trying to do is get down to having one candidate come in to do an on-site interview.
Okay, well, and just real quick, some of the questions you're going to be looking for during this hour. You're going to get some personal questions, get to feel who they are, their ministry stuff. You've got their history, we hope, already in front of you, but you want to fill that out, flesh it out. You want to hear who they are, what do they do, how they spend their time, and so on and so forth. Then you want to talk about some of their professional stuff. How do they prioritize? How do they spend their time? What kind of time do they spend in the office, out of the office? Who do they spend time with, and so on and so forth. Those are the general gist of what you're trying to do. Again, you're trying to find out a match between you and them. You're really looking for, and here's the key, folks, you're looking for their passion.
Right.
Is this a job that they're interviewing for? Or are they looking for a position, or are they looking for a place to be called, a place where God is leading them, where your passions and their passions match? So you want this, during this initial interview, you're going to want to be looking for and asking questions about what it is that excites them about ministry, and what they've done in the past with that, and how they hope to see that played out. Because you want to find out whether your passions and their passions match, because if they're passionate about, go back to your question, social justice, but you're really passionate about, if you will, evangelism, then you're probably going to be ships passing the night, and it won't be a really, really good match.
Well, and this is one of the biggest deals with congregations and pastors, is that congregations will say one thing and the pastors will say something else, and an outsider will say, wait a minute, what are y'all talking about? Or we're afraid to ask the questions. Pastors may be wanting a job so bad, or it may be their congregation has attached to a profile. They haven't even met the person except on paper, or maybe on a brief phone call, and they think that this is the one. And that comes about for a whole lot of reasons. So congregations and search committees, it's really important not to attach to a potential pastor until you've really gotten to know them and given them a chance to know you.
Well, this is a perfect segue to say this. There's a pastor for your congregation.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes a while for that pastor to find you and for you to find that pastor. And they may be in a position right now. They may not be ready for you. You may not be ready for them. But the problem is that sometimes we force the issue. We force it really badly. And and there's this in smaller congregations. There's this whole thing of low self-esteem that nobody would want us. And so you find a pastor or a potential pastor who really wants the job, who really wants to come, and it may not be a good mix. It may not even be close to a good fit, but because they want the job, they love us, they get called, and it's a disaster almost always for both the church and the pastor. So that's by the way, that would be a red flag. But
yes, thank you.
But the key here is to be aware that you're looking for matched passions, and you want to weed this out. You want to find candidates that really are there who are called. That's not just a job. They just don't need the income. That this is a and they may need the income, don't get me wrong, but it's a passion.
Most of us do.
Yeah, most of us do. But it's a passion. They really believe that in the same things you believe. They value the same things you value, which, by the way, is why it's so important for you to know what your mission, your vision, and your values really are.
Well, and to be able to ask good questions that will get at that without saying, well, our values are such and such.
Right.
Because you don't want to get a parrot or a mirroring going on.
And you want to find out what their values are. Without them, if you can, in some ways, without them actually knowing your values.
Right.
Don't show your hand. If you have a high value of hospitality, and then the questions you might ask it would be around people who come to your congregation, who visit a congregation who are very different. How are they received? Or questions along those lines, so that you can find out whether that value is the same as your value.
That's good. That's good. Well, let's talk for a moment about the format of this phone interview, or a little bit more. We've talked a little bit about it already, and that is that again, you want to do, what did you call it, a psychiatric hour or something like that, a 50-minute appointment, no more than an hour, and you want to do the same format for every candidate, even to the point that the same people ask the same questions in the same order. So you introduce one another. Hello. You're going to have someone pray, not the pastor, the candidate. So somebody on your team is going to pray. You're going to ask them getting to know you type of general questions, move into the more personal questions, particularly clarification questions. Any kind of questions you've had about anything you've seen or you've heard. Then again, you go back to some more general questions, and then you're going to ask them, do you have any questions for this for the search committee or for this team? What would you like to ask? When they're asking those questions, write down what they're asking, because what you want to do is look at the kinds of questions that they're asking. I always find it interesting when ministers ask a series of questions about conflict. They'll call to ask about a congregation, and all their questions are about conflict and how conflicted they are and this and that. And I just, sometimes I'll even say, wow, are you coming from a conflicted congregation? The kind of questions help to tell you what their foci and passions are, right? And then finally, at the very end, you need to have a timekeeper, and at the 5 minutes before you end, you need to give the follow-up details. What can the candidate expect next? This is how many people that we're having phone interviews with. These are how many people we expect to call in for on-site interviews. This is the time frame that we're looking at, and there it is. So that's your format. Thank them very much, and then hang up.
Right, and then comes the all-important rating. Okay, now, as soon as you hang up, it is not the time for anyone to begin sharing their insights or their thoughts. Instead, you want to do essentially a rock, paper, scissors kind of ranking of this pastor, and you're going to use, if you will, 1, 2, 3, and they're going to put up how many fingers on one hand that they think this candidate, their personal feelings of how this candidate, or how much they want him back. So if they put up a 1, that means I'm not interested really in going any farther with this candidate. If they put up a 3, it's like, yeah, okay, either way. And they put up a 5, it's like, I definitely want to pursue another interview, some more follow-up, and see how it goes. Now, again, you don't want to attach,
Right.
and you want everyone to do this at the same
time.
time, and you want to write those down or have them write it down in front of them, because then you're going to debrief.
Well, and then you're going to average those together after you can do some debriefing, and that debriefing may call for another rating. But at the end of all the interviews, you do that after each interview, and at the end of all the interviews, and if it takes you a week to get through all those interviews, not that we think that's a great idea, but sometimes somebody's on vacation or something, you don't do anything with any of that until the end of all the interviews, and then you go back to your ratings and you prioritize. You want to prioritize your candidates and see, are there any really top-notch candidates? Now, you may need to, if there are several top-notch candidates, you may need to do another phone interview with them. But what you're trying to do, again, is to hone in to one on-site interview. And sometimes, I will say, larger congregations in particular can afford and are able to have the resources, other resources to do on-site interviews. And so anybody
And they
who
may bring
really
in
serious
up to 3.
yeah, really only 3, because then it kind of becomes a popularity contest, and there's some issues with that. So so now we're going to get them to the on-site, and you want to schedule these for 2 to 3 days when there's not a lot of busyness going on at the church. You might think, oh, we wanted to see us in all our glory, but confidentiality is the key to this whole process. So you don't want to bring them on site.
And you also don't want other people in the congregation to attach before you get ready to go on to the next stage.
The whole
So
reason.
you're going to schedule this on-site interview, and the first thing you don't want is you don't want them to preach. You don't want to go, by the way, you don't want to go in advance and listen to them preach. Right. That's really common. But what is very often the case is you find someone who's a dynamic pulpiteer and they don't have what is needed to lead your congregation forward. And someone who maybe have an off day, or maybe they're not the greatest pulpiteer, but they have everything else that your congregation needs to take you forward, that candidate may wash out in your minds or in your just in the conversation. They may not make the next cut, and that can be disastrous. Now, we do have a caveat, and that is if you're a large church, and by a large church we mean 1,000 or over, if you're a large church, if they are not an excellent pulpiteer, if they're not really top rank, it's done, because at that level of church, what the pulpit presence is very much a part of what will take the congregation into the next level. It's not the only thing, but if they can't pull that off, if you're falling asleep or whatever, then it's a no-go.
But at that point, actually, you're going to be going to watch them preach in their own habitat. You're not. Right. Don't rely on videotapes, because they're going to send you the best possible videotape they have, and there are all kinds of, again, as you say, exceptions and caveats to that. Okay, well, let's keep going here, because I know timing is coming on us. So the goals of this are
the on-site
visit are to determine compatibility. We're really interested. We think this. Are we compatible? Do they look the way we look? Are they quirky, and are they too quirky for our congregation? Are they not quirky enough for our congregation? You're going to want to see them in over these 2 or 3 days. Do they not only walk their talk? Do they walk the walk? This is your chance to get another set of clarifications there. If you've got any red flags, don't bring them in for the on-site. Red flags need to be taken care of before that. And if you've got red flags, something's going wrong, like you've attached to this pastor, don't make excuses for anybody. Once you make excuses, that's a red flag there. Just keep
he had
going.
an off day. If you have a pastor who had an off day at the interview, it's done. Really.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, if people are
if
making
you have to make excuses,
that's true.
Yeah.
If they
do. If they can't pull off the interview, it's done.
Yeah, I stand by that too. Yes. Okay. But the other part of the other goals, the last 2 goals of this on-site interview are really from the pastor's point of view. The pastor should be determining compatibility. Am I compatible with this congregation? Can I see myself serving in this place? And they also want to see or they want to test for family fit. Could my family fit in this congregation? Could they fit in this community? So those are your goals.
I want to add a little piece about what you said about the compatibility piece. In both interviews, if the pastor doesn't ask questions that are about passion, about where you're going, about what their passions are and trying to find a fit, then that's a huge red flag. Because if a pastor's not asking, and if they're not actually interviewing you, then they're after a job. They're not looking for a call. They're after a job. And you don't need someone who needs a job. There's lots of people who need jobs. You're looking for the fit, the person who is called into that position, who has passion, who matches. And so the questions they should be asking are, where do you want to go? What are your values? Along those lines. And when you get in the personal interview, the one-on-one, they should be pushing that home. They should be pushing you almost as hard as you're pushing them. And speaking of pushing hard, I want to say this, is that when this potential prospect arrives, this candidate arrives on site, you want to give them some time, a couple hours at least, maybe the overnight time, to rest, relax, and regroup. But when the interview starts, when this interview process starts, you want it to be, if you will, a full itinerary. You don't want to wear them out in terms of just push, but you want it one after another, so that you're having lunch with so-and-so or with the committee, and then you're going to have this windshield tour with part of the committee, then you're having dinner with this group, and then after that there's this meeting or whatever after that, and we're starting it hard at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the whole point is you want to see them sweat. Mm-hmm. You want to get them to a place where they're, if you will, their guard's down. Because that's the pastor you're going to get, is the pastor who is, when they get past all the courtship part and things start to not so much unravel. You're not trying to
honeymoon's over.
Right. You don't want them to unravel, but you want to see how they work under pressure. And if they can't handle it under pressure at the interview process, that's again a red flag. You want to draw your lines and move on to your next candidate.
Right. And even if you say, well, we're not a conflicted congregation, it doesn't matter. There's always pressure in ministry. And yes, okay, that's good. Another part of that, though, is you really need, if there's a spouse, if the pastor has a spouse or a fiance, you need to bring them in as well for this on-site. If you're down to the final candidate, right? So when you're down to the final, because the family, they need to be consulted as well. And so it's not common for churches to do some things with the spouse. If it's a wife, then women often, if it's a husband, then men in the church, to show them places to live, even, or neighborhoods, give them a feel for what's going on there. So let me touch upon the process for this on-site interview. Very similar to the initial interview. Beforehand, you're going to want to make sure that you send them additional information. Again, this week's handout has listings of what that information is. You get that information to them. You come in. You're going to ask some general questions. Personal questions, you're going to give some personal information about you. You're going to want to do those clarifications, honing in questions are going to go in there, and you're going to say a little bit more on that in a moment. And then you're going to take a break. And a 20-minute break, take the candidate somewhere again where they can kind of just get refreshed, relax, use facilities if need be. And your team at that point needs to do that straw poll piece again. But this is based on, one, let's not go forward with this interview, to a 5 where definitely let's keep moving in. It feels good to us.
Right, and if there's enough people that have the ones, that's folks, it's all done. You just need to go.
A flag.
Right, it's beyond a flag. Go ahead, thank them for coming and send them on their way. Don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. You may want to say why.
Definitely tell them
why they why
compatibility.
Right, let them know and what those points are.
Right.
I want to talk.
Say more about
I want to talk about the questions. One of the questions or one of the sets of questions at this level, you're wanting to find out behaviors. You should at this point have a good sense of their values, but you want to know how they behave, how do they get results, etc. And so you're going to be asking questions like this. So tell me about a time when you and the board had a disagreement. and you're going to let them answer. Now, everybody is ready to answer one of those questions. So you're going to ask the same question again with a different slant. So tell me about a time when you and your board at a different ministry setting, or or with an individual. Then you're going to do a third time. You want to do it 3 times for every behavior question, because they can fudge once, they can bluff twice, but the third time you're getting down to the meat of it. So tell me about a time when there was a disagreement in direction that you had with a board chair.
And how did you resolve that?
Yeah, how did you resolve it? What were the results, etc. And you're going to want to, how do they spend their time? How do they, deal with conflict? How do they deal with disappointment when they want to go one direction and the congregation is not yet ready to go? How do they bring that around? Those are the kind of behavior questions. And again, 3 questions for every single behavior question, so that you can get at the root of how they behave.
Now remember, if they're worth their weight in salt, they're going to be writing down the questions that you're asking, because the kind of things that you hone in on are going to be evident of what you've got going on in your congregation and what you need. So you are going to want to keep that in mind and hold that in intention. Well, like I said, there's so many more things that we could say. Can we just end perhaps with a few of the red flags that congregations should be listening or watching for?
Right. Well, the first red flag is near and dear to our hearts. We're denominational people, and if you are your congregation is in a denomination, your denomination almost certainly has some process by which you get candidates, or by which candidates come into your congregation. Even if you're a congregational denomination, there's normally a way. If you have a candidate who is thwarting that, going around, getting through a friend of a friend, etc., that's a red flag. That tells you up front they don't play fair, they don't play by the rules, and they'll probably not play by the rules later either. So if they're thwarting the system, red flag.
Another red flag is the candidate who really pursues you, who keeps calling you, calls your board chair, calls your search chair.
Who stalks you.
Yeah, really. But it doesn't seem like stalking. It just seems like they really care about you. They may be emailing all the time, just checking in. That's a flag. And no, I'm sorry, they don't care for you more than the others. It's just that the others know the rule of thumb that you don't pursue. Remember that dating metaphor, the church is the guy, and the candidates, even if they're males, are the girls, and they're not the ones to make the phone calls and do the initiations.
Right. And now there's one more red flag I want to touch on, and this is for both of you, the church and the pastor. And that is, especially in the larger churches, candidates are no longer plentiful, good, qualified candidates. And the reality is, this process, if you're going after a high-quality candidate, is really a courtship process. And that means you treat each other, and especially the congregation who is wooing the potential candidate, that's what you're doing. You're wooing them. Now, you're still hard-hitting in your questions. You still want to get down under the nitty-gritty. But if you're trying to get a high-quality candidate, you need to know that it's a huge red flag if you are not, and we don't mean literally whining and dining, but if that's not the general attitude of you're trying to put your best foot forward, not glossing over any warts, we're not saying that, but you're again getting at the fine china, the silver, whatever, and wooing that candidate. And candidate, if the church isn't doing that, if they don't know enough that about how to woo a candidate, especially when they're a high quality candidate, walk away. Because it just says that it's a congregation of entitlement, and that there's a pretty good chance that they're going to walk on you later as if you get called.
Well, and likewise, churches, if that pastor isn't grateful or gracious in receiving what you pour out, that may be a flag of entitlement, and one that you should ignore or not ignore. Haha. Okay, we are so out of time. You can see more red flags on the handout, and
lots of information. It's a 5-page handout. There's good stuff there for you. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week.